actually, Brian, we would like to ask you to define the main characteristics of a true social business. What are we talking about when we're talking about true social businesses?
Well, first, I want to say hello to the class, and thank you very much for having to put up with my face on a digital screen. It looks like you guys have a beautiful day out there in Copenhagen. So I will do my best to answer the questions, and please feel free to probe in any areas that you would like to know more about. I'll start off by saying this, that I have moved into a realm called digital transformation because the characteristics of social business have become so important that I think we misunderstand exactly what they are. So let me say this. It is not about social media. A social business is about the characteristics of starting with a philosophy where a business is less hierarchical, and it understands that in order to become part of the community, you have to be authentic, you have to be transparent, but you also have to be intentional in becoming part of the community, not just using social media to broadcast, to market, to sell, to advertise, which is unfortunately what most businesses do when you study how they use social media. So the characteristics of a social business are using social media as an enabler to do something more positive and community-centered, but also aligned with business goals. That's really the key part of a social business. Now, to go a little bit further, the last part is adding value. So if you think about the most famous businesses that we read about all the time in terms of social media, it's either because they came up with something so creative and amazing and funny, or they broadcast something on Twitter that was a mistake. So you get these two extremes. You don't really hear about the fact that in some businesses, social media is distributed into as many as 13 different parts of the company: customer service, different lines of business, public relations, marketing, advertising. So a social business is one that uses social media as a way of doing their job better, but adding value back into the communities of which they serve. That's a big difference. And so, sorry that the answer is so long, it's just a really big question. What you're really talking about is more philosophical than technological. And this is the key point. And by the way, I don't know that this is the most popular definition, but because I'm the one who studied social business the most in the world, I get to define it. It is really about human characteristics that allow you to take social media as you've learned it as an individual. Think about this for a moment. How you use Twitter or Facebook or YouTube, it's deeply personal. And social media came into the company from people like us, so excited, so passionate. And it's not something that IT or the CIO said, hey, everybody, I've discovered Twitter, and we're going to attach it to your email account and your mobile phone. It was backwards. And it is because it's so personal that we got it confused for its business promise, but it was because it's so personal that was the real opportunity for us, right? It forces businesses to think about being more human. From there, then you can design social media strategies. But being a social business is one that uses social media to enable business goals, but more importantly, to add value back into the communities. So, voila.
Yeah, great. We definitely hear what you're saying. You should know that earlier today we discussed if anyone here could actually come up with Danish case stories or Danish examples of businesses or organizations that you could say from that definition were true social businesses, and we struggled somewhat. We couldn't really come up with some. Is that sort of a point that it's an aspirational thing, and there are very few businesses who are actually doing that, or how should we view that?
Yeah, actually, that's a very good way of putting it. It is very aspirational, and this is why I'm also looking at digital transformation, because I always have to stay on the aspirational end. In the report, I believe you said the class had an opportunity to read the 6 stages of social business evolution. And off to the right of the bell curve is basically connected. It's a business is social. It's a way of business. Okay, so for example, if you're having conversations about why your CEO should be on Twitter, that is not a social business. If you're having conversations with your CEO and he says or she says, do you know that what we're trying to do as a company is so important? It's not just about selling more products. It's about giving back. It's about hearing our customers and what they want. It's about making them feel valued. And then someone says, wow, Twitter would be a great platform for you to share that message. Then they say, yes, absolutely, because that's what we're trying to do, is give back value and get value from the community. It's a very different scenario, but Twitter just becomes the tool in the latter part. The same is true for the United States. You have a lot of social media professionals, champions, who go into their organizations. They go from conference to conference. They go to blogs. They read all the books, and they go into their executive meeting, and then nobody is excited about social media like they are, and it's a little bit defeating. But it's because they keep going in with the tools. We've got to use Facebook. I was just at a conference and we saw how our competitors doing this, and we got to get on this. And then someone's going to say, all right, what's the ROI? And then they're going to say, oh, that's the wrong question to ask. It's not about the ROI. It's about tweets and likes. But it is. The social business is about ROI. It's about getting a return on your investment and using social media as tools to do your job better, or to do something that doesn't just add value, but that makes someone feel appreciated, or you feel appreciated, or you get to take something back that's insightful to build a better product or to build a better service program. There's not a lot of companies in the world like that.
No, it sort of begs the question. I guess it could be a bit intimidating for some companies or organizations. I mean, is it really then for all organizations and businesses stepping out onto this aspirational path towards becoming a true social business? Is it for everybody?
It's not for everybody. So one of the most interesting examples of a company that people say is a great social business is Zappos in Las Vegas, right? But let me tell you why they're a good social business, not because how they use Twitter or Facebook. I'm not sure if the class is familiar with it's called, what is it called? It'll come to me in a second. They just introduced a new business model where a traditional business is very hierarchical, right? You have the CEO at the top and your middle management all the way down to everyday employees. They have flattened that organization. So they're now run by groups of concentric circles. So it's very flat. This is an example of how a business becomes social. When its management style, how the team works, it's very democratized. It's not command and control. So that's one example to see how far this can go, is that once you really start living a social business philosophy, you realize that even how you support it is not traditional. And this is very important. And the last thing I'll just say on this is in the new report, I don't know if you had a chance to read it, about digital transformation. There's a section there that talks about how social media got to this point of trying to become a social business, and all of the champions that you've probably read about, I also interviewed for this research, they started to, I felt like a psychiatrist. They started to tell me their deep problems and their frustrations and how they were thinking about quitting their jobs because they weren't getting traction and support after all these years of trying and pushing. And they all had the same story, and until they realized if they could couch it differently. And the question would be, what would my digital customer do that my traditional customer doesn't do, right? It's a very simple question, and when you ask it and you try to answer it, it's fascinating what you learn. What would my digital customer do that's different than my traditional customer? And you start to realize that things like social and mobile, all these things start to come alive in a very different way, because now you're looking at behavior, not how you're using technology or what technology you use. And I hope I'm not confusing you, but the aspiration of becoming a social business is not a goal. It's a byproduct of actually trying to be more customer or employee centric.
Interesting, interesting. Let's change gears here for a bit. We've at this course here, we ask of people that they sort of come up with proposals for creating also, as you were saying, a value chain from what are their business goals, and how can social media actually add value to that, and how can we then formulate that into tactics, and then ultimately start measuring on that. And it's a really, really hard thing to do for most people. Why do you think it is so hard to closely align social media strategies with business strategies? Because in real life, not that many people actually succeed in doing it.
Oh wow! It's because they don't try. It's because they don't try to do it. And when they're asked to do it, so the ROI question, for example, it's very. If you ask that at a social media conference, you'll watch people yell and fight and argue and get very heated about the conversation, and it's because I think it's a form of well, two things. I think if a social media professional gets upset about the ROI question, it's a psychological reaction of denial. It's just because you're not trying to deal with reality. And if an executive asks you about the ROI, it's also a psychological reaction of fear. You're pushing me out of my comfort zone, right? So I don't know if you've ever seen this expression that I've had. I wrote it back in 2007, and it's probably the most often shared quote even after all these years, and it is that social media is not about technology, it's about social science, psychology, sociology, anthropology, ethnography. You'll hear in all of my answers that I keep coming back to behavior, people, minds, brains, how you feel. That's because social media is really passionate. So the question you're asking is complicated because people don't align it with business goals because it's not how you naturally learned about social media. You use it as a way to communicate with your friends, to network with people, to follow celebrities, to just as a pleasant distraction every day, you know, as a way of our addiction with the small screen, you know, it keeps us connected. Now, when you bring it into business, you're showing signs of being a human being, which is fantastic. All businesses need to be more human. So all of this excitement, all of this passion that you have as a human being is the beginning. You're pushing businesses forward. Now what you need to do is take that passion and say, okay, it's not, the question should not be what is our Pinterest strategy or what is our Twitter strategy. The question should be, what is the state of our customer satisfaction today, and how could we use Twitter to improve that result? What are our customers talking about in the market, and how could we use that insight to develop better products and services? So you start with the end, and then you use social media as an enabler. When you do that, you naturally bring the two together. And I'll share a quote with you. One of the executives I met with, he's the president of a global company. I can't say the name, but we all know the name of the company. And he sat down with me and he said, you know, one of my biggest frustrations is that over the years I've had so many people come into my office and ask me for more money and more resources for social media because it's so important. He said, but the one thing that none of them have ever done is tell me why and how we were going to use social media to achieve our business goals or priorities. He said, the minute someone does that, they have my attention. That's all anybody's asking for. And by the way, if you can do that, you become incredibly valuable, much more valuable than anybody else practicing social media.
It's extraordinary what you're saying, because it's, I mean, it really is a message to all you guys here. You're going back to newspapers, TV broadcasters, radio broadcasters, ministries, all kinds of organizations who are represented here, and what I hear you saying is that look at the task at hand and say, what do we want to achieve, and then ask in that context, how can social media bring value to that? I guess that's the way to turn it around.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, in the media industry, by the way, is one of the greatest industries to be in for social media. I used to say, well, I still say it because it's funny, but back in the day when the media industry was trying to figure out the importance of social media, I used to say, well, news no longer breaks, it tweets, right? Because in the United States, any event that happened, whether it was an earthquake or a celebrity death, it was on Twitter an average of 22 minutes before the first media outlet would report on it. And that's a pretty big gap. I've written a lot of research on this. So you actually have two types of opportunities in the media industry. One is to solve business problems. The other is to create business opportunities. Because you have to remember that the media business is not only evolving because of technology, you actually have a new opportunity to create entirely new models and channels for how you use this. CNN is one of the more interesting ones here in the United States because I get to see a lot of the things that they're doing behind the scenes or the questions that they're asking. How do you reinvent the newsroom? How do you reinvent community-based fact-checking? So you have two types of opportunities then to say, let's use social media to solve these problems, and then you can have the creative sessions. What else could we do, right? And these are all. It's such a wonderful time to be in your industry. I'm really excited for all of you, but it's only limited to what you want to do.
We see a lot of both companies and also both within and without or outside the media industry who are sort of step one into adapting social media into their strategies is almost always about how can we get more clicks or how can we get more people to watch our stuff or interact with us. We sort of, at least in Denmark, yet we haven't seen that many organizations who are really evolving from a listening perspective. Do you have any thoughts on that? The importance of listening?
Yeah, there's two quick thoughts. The first one, you brought up a really interesting point that I don't want to lose, and that is that companies compete for the moment. Okay, everybody does this, and it's a bad habit. Likes, views, tweets, retweets, comments, that's competing for the moment. And you judge your success for, say, content marketing based on how people interacted with it. So just to get philosophical again, I want you to think about what you produce in social media as a social object. Social object is defined as, it's actually something that Yuri Engström, he's the co-founder of Jaiku, which was an early Twitter competitor back in the day. A social object is something of which sparks connections and conversation around it, right? So you could think about an infographic in a very simple example, or a video as a social object. When you introduce it, what happens, right? Are you able to spark dialogue, interaction, new relationships? Okay, so thinking about it already in this direction, you might think about what you produce differently. The second part about this, before we get to listening, is what happens next. This is the part that most businesses miss. Once you watch a video, what happens next? And I call this experience architecture. I want to design what happens next. If I want to get you to a landing page, if I want you to feel something, if I want you to associate with the brand, if I want you to tell your friends, all of this is engineered. I'll give you an example. Is everybody in the class familiar with BuzzFeed?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay.
Most people, yeah.
I want you to think about this as a very scary model for the future of journalism. 6 minutes is the average attention span a teenager has while doing homework before they have to reach for a device. And some of us will say 6 minutes. That's ridiculous. That's not a lot of time at all. And then I want you to think about it right now. If I were to ask you to sit there for 6 minutes and we'll all be quiet, you'll say that's a long time. That's why BuzzFeed has crazy headlines and animated GIFs and all of these things. So if you see a BuzzFeed story in Facebook, they've already engineered that you're going to click it because it's interesting, and then you're going to watch it or read it, and then you're going to share it. All of that is very scientific. They have people who do this, who study this. The reporters are incentivized or paid based on how many views they get and how many shares they get. So once you start designing content this way, or once you start motivating design this way, it's different, right? The last thing, though, is that I think it should be more meaningful. There's a video going around the internet about a week ago for Coca-Cola and the drones. Has anybody seen this?
No. No.
Okay. All right. Well, you have homework. It's a very inspirational, touching video about how Coca-Cola. If you think about Coca-Cola's message, I mean, I don't drink soda, but their message is delivering happiness, right? It's a very simple but emotional message, and social media is perfect for this. So if you think about then how would you deliver happiness, they found a human story in Singapore. Singapore is a first world country where it's actually a very fast growing company. High rises seem to be coming up every week. But the people who build the high rises are mostly an immigrant workforce. So they don't live there. They're brought in to build these high rises. They live in camps. It's actually pretty third world in terms of the life that the workforce lives. They don't see their families for long periods of time. So Coca-Cola decided to recognize them. And during a day at work, they used drones to deliver Coke to all of the workers on these buildings. But not just Cokes, right, because that would be a commercial. They got everybody to take pictures of themselves, like old Polaroid cameras, to write notes, and they strapped it to all of the cans to say thank you for what you do. We wanted to recognize you. Such a touching video. When you leave that video, what happens next is you feel happy. You feel wonderful. And what they did was successfully evoked an emotion that delivered happiness. So when you left that video, you will remember it, you will tell people, you won't just share it on social media, you will associate Coca-Cola and delivering happiness. It's very experiential and it's intentional. This is the part that we have to start to think about. What happens once I have your attention? The last is, I'll give you an example, and I promise we'll get to listening, is Old Spice. Have you seen all the Old Spice videos? You know, I'm on a horse. Those hilarious, very hilarious. Naturally, the debate was, did Old Spice sell more body wash as a result of those YouTube videos? And the answer is yes, sure. So if what happens next is you watch these commercials or these videos and you buy body wash, that's interesting. But I believe it was something more. When I was a kid, my grandfather used Old Spice. And to me, growing up, even until the last few years ago, I always associated Old Spice with smelling old, being old, you know, just nothing about being sexy. Just that was my grandfather's stuff. So after watching those videos, though, it made Old Spice interesting to me. It made it aspirational to be like this, to be cool, to be the guy that everybody's guy smells like, whatever the tagline was. So what Old Spice successfully did for me was connect the brand with me. It was now a modern brand, something that I forgot about my grandfather. So again, it has an outcome. It has an effect. It's cause and effect. So viral videos, infographics, blog posts, any social object that you introduce has to have an effect. And you have to design what that effect should be, because when you go backwards to then design it for that effect, it is an absolutely different strategy you would have had than saying, let's go make a viral video. Let's make this into an infographic. Radical. And I can tell you from studying this after all of these years, those that study with an effect in mind are the ones that are incredibly more interesting, engaging, entertaining, and successful. Now, the last thing about listening.
I just want to interject, before we get to listening, I just want to interject a question here. It almost, I mean, this is a room full of content pros. And I'm sure that if you woke them up in the middle of the night, they could turn out content like this. I mean, what you're saying is, don't just turn out content on social media, but turn out sort of not constructed but thought of social objects, that sort of begs you have to slow down the pace then. And can you afford to do that this day and age, was my question.
There's a very interesting, I'll give you some more homework, and I hope that nobody knows this person because I'm intentionally not trying to be mean. But there's an infographic out there that is called, "Do You Need an Infographic?" And its premise is very cute, but I want you to look at it. And you're going to say, it's probably the worst infographic you've ever seen. It's not functional. You're not going to share it. And if you do, it's going to be to make fun of it. And it was a good idea, right? Okay. They created content because they can. Social's easy, so you could publish it. And you can already see how it starts to fail, right? It's the wrong. Great ideas is not how you start. What's the effect you want, right? Delivering happiness. Come up with drones, delivering Cokes with pictures. It's a very different beginning. So I often say that a good idea or an idea doesn't necessarily make it a good idea. Creativity is something you need, but it's not where you start. With social objects, the start is to evoke a response, right? Once I have your attention, what am I going to do with it? And so this is experience architecture. It's something new. It's actually what my next book is about. But it's incredibly complex. But it's also very emotional. It's empathetic. And so if you care about the outcome, about the engagement, what somebody feels and does in that moment, work backwards, and then churn out your content. I guarantee you it'll be different.
Great. Okay. You're free to go on to listening. The importance of yeah.
Well, there's a difference between listening and hearing. And again, to get philosophical, do you know that when people listen, they do it much more transactionally on social media? So, for example, how many people mentioned our brand versus our competitor's brand? What's the share of voice? What's the sentiment around that? And these are all good things, but that's not listening. Listening is when you seek out information to make a decision, or you seek out information to improve something, or you seek out information or people to engage in a moment. But listening is what you take away from something and what you do with it as well, right? So in real life, if you watch people, I like to people watch. If you watch two people in a cafe and they're sitting and having coffee, one person's talking, and before they're done talking, the next person's ready to respond. It's just they've already formulated what they're going to say, which means that they shut off what this person's saying. They're no longer hearing it because they already know what they want to say, and that's too common in social media. We have a message, we have a story, we have a goal. What we're really trying to do is understand what's happening, both at a word level and a relationship level, and then also a cultural level, right? Listening gives you an advantage of empathy, right? You need to hear what people are saying and then do something about it. So do you engage and improve service? Do you recognize someone's comment? Even the mere favoriting of a tweet, if somebody says something interesting, has an emotional reaction to the person who was just favorited. All of these things are good-natured and intentional in nature. Listening is it's a bigger opportunity than I think we give it credit for.
All right. So, but you're saying that we've actually just had a discussion here whether or not, as a brand, as an educational institution, as a ministry, as a broadcaster, whether you can whether it's always beneficial to you at the end and your reputation if you interject a comment whenever you hear your brand is mentioned. I mean, there are some various views on it here. It would be interesting to hear your take. I mean, can you also listen and then say something too much?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. By the way, there's no right or wrong answer here. It's just related to what you're trying to do. So if you're trying to be omnipresent and human, then you probably do want to be part of conversations. But do know this, that I've studied digital influence since the mid-1990s. The more you talk, the less effect you have when you talk. And by effect, I mean reverberation. So I'll give you a simple example. I have 2 Twitter accounts, one for my brand and one for me as a person. And the reason why I have 2 Twitter accounts is because my brand, when I say something, I want it to reverberate. I need it to go far and wide around the world. But I don't also want to be a jerk. I don't want to not respond. I don't want to be that person that says, oh, Brian, he's so antisocial on social media. So I have a second account, and I do respond to people who ask questions, who need ideas, or just to let them know that I'm paying attention. The reason I have to is that if I use the main account to also engage with people, when I say something important, I've conditioned my community to just see that response and maybe engage in the moment, not to help me reverberate something. So you sort of condition the space. So I don't. I have a conversation over here so people can say I'm still social, but when I use this account to say something important, it is important. So you have to engage, but you also have to think about what is the effective engagement, and then have your engagement strategy as a result of that.
Great, thanks. Let's change gears a bit. Someone asked in class, we've been looking at organizational models, social media models, and someone asked the sort of holistic model where everyone functions at a very high level without a center. How large a part of an organization need to be empowered this way before you can actually say that you are operating with the holistic model? Does that make sense, the question here?
The holistic model, I think, is probably my favorite of all of the models that we've studied. The most common, by the way, is hub and spokes, so center and spokes around it. And after that, the second most common, it's actually much more of an evolution, I should say, is it's called a multiple hub and spokes. So you have a hub, spokes, and then hub and spokes again, right? This is an interesting question, and the reason why it's my favorite is because I'm going to use email as an example. Everybody has email in your company. Nobody needs a center for email. You use it to do your job better. And that's the way, I think you had a question in the preparation materials about Clay Shirky, about how technology is interesting when it stops being interesting.
Exactly.
Of which I disagree with in his words, but not his point. I think what he's trying to say is that we shouldn't have to think about how to use it. It should be natural, right? So there's a better quote that I think it's Nassim Taleb. It said, technology is at its best when it's invisible.
Yeah.
The reason I say this is because social media is one of the most special things that has happened to business and society since probably the printing press. It's incredibly valuable, and I don't think we should ever lose sight of the fact that it gave regular people a voice. So that's why we can't lose its interesting value. It's going to change everybody's business in this room, and that's for the better. We have to remember that. But the second thing is that when you get to a holistic model, it's because you know how important social media is, and you're self-governing, self-aware, educated, and also strategic in how you use it, because it is so powerful. So the holistic model is honestly far away because we don't yet appreciate all of those elements for what it can do for our business and our communities that we're trying to serve. So this is why you have a hub and spoke or multiple hub and spoke, because you have governance and education in the center. So the San Francisco Chronicle, for example, has a digital, it's essentially a center for digital literacy. That's their hub. And they're trying to take all of these reporters who have been in the game for 10, 20, 30 years, and they're trying to teach them social, right? Only a few of them are really going to understand the impact. Most of them are going to say, my kids can't put the phone down. They're always on Instagram. They're always taking selfies. And it's because they psychologically cannot relate to the culture of social media, and that's their greatest inhibitor. If you cannot relate to it, you can't use it. So holistic is far away, but the minute we get there, it's when it's invisible. It's when it's special and we're all self-governing and aware and strategic in how we use it.
Which also then, it sort of then follows that the educational aspect within the organization, the organizing of the educational aspect, is a key point, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. You asked about the Maslow's needs versus the social business needs. That was Jeremiah Aying. He's a former colleague, and he's actually my neighbor. He created this as
this is the pyramid that we
the pyramid as a more a foundational graphic, right? A foundational framework to show that before you could use social media, you have to think more deeply about it. So, for example, one of the more common things that I see in playbooks or strategy guides is use common sense. And to me, in social media, common sense is the most uncommon thing I've ever seen. So, for example, with has everybody seen the U.S. Airways gaffe that happened a few weeks ago?
Today. Yeah. I won't say if everyone has seen it, but we discussed it today.
Yes, I mean that's so. If I told that employee, so don't post pornographic images on our company Twitter account, the person would say, "Oh, of course not." But it happened, and it's because there isn't a foundational element of where people walk us through everyday scenarios of how something can go wrong and how something can go right. So the education level is important. I've gone through a lot of these, and most of the time it's, here's how to use Twitter, here's how to use Facebook. That's basic. What we need to have is more education and governance around how does it align with our business goals and how do we use it as such. If I'm on sales, if I'm on the reporting team, if I'm on fact-checking team, somebody has to be of the level of being a strategist to say this is how we're going to use it and train as such, not just keeping it very elementary. And then you need rules. And most importantly, by the way, everybody, you need rewards. And this will be interesting for you. If you're going to use social media in your job and it wasn't part of your job when you were hired, you deserve a reward. If we're asking you to do something differently, if we're asking you then to be measured successfully on these new tools, then therefore you should be compensated accordingly, right? So HR, human resources, now needs to be involved in making sure that you are motivated and rewarded for how well you use social media. Not just don't do this, don't do that, and if you do it wrong, you're fired. It is, here's where we're trying to go, and here's what we're going to give you to keep you going and reward you as you get there.
Great. Someone also asked, do an organization always need a social media policy?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I'll give you one more, though. The social media policies that I read suck. They're horrible. Most of the playbooks that I read are horrible. And it's because you have some social media person just sitting there writing it saying, Twitter, Facebook, our policy is don't be stupid, be happy, be human, be transparent, be authentic. And it's all great. But what if you thought about it as, for example, there's I don't know, class, if you have access to it, but it's called the 7 Success Factors of Social Business Strategy. It's a little ebook I wrote with Charlene last year. I think it's $1. So it's probably very cheap considering the conversion rate for you. So maybe we pay you to take it. But I highly recommend everybody read it. I would send it to you, except I only have it on iBooks, and I can't send that.
Not a problem. We'll organize it. Yeah.
It's the 7 things you need to do, and the first one is vision. What are we trying to do with this? And how is it going to make our business better? If I could articulate that to you, I can connect with you. I can get you to buy in. I can make you a stakeholder, right? Otherwise, why are we doing this? No, that conversation still exists today. The reason I'm sharing this with you is because you can't write a policy until you have that. And most of the times, people just are. I'm telling you, I think what I just read off in terms of transparency and authenticity, I think that's everybody's policy if you read it. But when they start to get interesting, it's because they have a vision for what's possible. The second thing is that a business is on the right track when they have a social media style guide. So much like we have in the United States, I don't know what you use there for journalistic standards, but we have the AP style guide here, and then also the Strunk and White style guide. And these are guides that sort of allow you to use just to be a better journalist and a better content creator. But when you work with a brand, they have a style guide for, what font do they use? What is the Pantone color? What imagery do we use to evoke the brand, right? But we don't have that for social media. What is the voice? What is the persona? What are the characteristics of engagement? Because otherwise, if I don't tell you what this is, you're going to use social media transparently, authentically, you're going to be human, and you're going to be using common sense. But that doesn't tell that none of your activities reinforce what our business represents in social media. And this is a really big opportunity for us. We have to think beyond just the policy and the education. We have to think aspirationally. How are we going to use social media to be this? So define this.
Great, great. We have to. I think we're nearing the end of our talk here. There was one question here, Brian. I don't know what you say to it, but take Lady Gaga, who is praised for her use of social media. Puts out a smiley, and 93,000 people either comment on it or likes it. Is that still? I mean, where we're going with this? Is that still social media? I mean, for her, with this mass audience, is it still social media? And is there a point where social media sort of defeats its own purpose because some corporations would have very large audiences? Can it still be social media?
This is I could write a book about this question. Social media. So when you take away Twitter, Facebook, Foursquare, Instagram, and you just have the two words social media. I'm going to strip it down to a very basic answer, and I promise it'll be relevant. There's always a debate every year since 2004. Is social media as a term dead? When can we stop saying social media? And I'm an optimist. I like to see the good possibilities. I like to see the light. And I think that you can't stop using social media until you can appreciate why social is in front of media, right? You've had multimedia, you have new media, you have all of these things that have naturally run their course. Social media is important because it's social. That means that I am not talking at you. I am not giving you messages that I sat in a boardroom with a whole bunch of people and then lawyers approved what I can say. It is social. It's human. It's natural. It's engaging. It's more than two-way, right? It's every way. And as long as people have something interesting to say and they care, and as long as people respond, then it should always be that way. There are people in this world who still write letters to their favorite celebrities, and their favorite celebrity doesn't even see those letters. They have someone who just says, thank you, here's a picture, and sends it back out. But that Lady Gaga takes time to engage with her community. She builds a community, and that's what this is about. It's not an audience. It's not about clicks or likes. It's about a community, and a community means something more than just belonging to it, right, or having access to it. A community matters when belonging means that together we do something great, or we stand for something great, or we represent or symbolize something great, right? That's what's special about it. Businesses use social media as a brand talking to audiences, and that's where it breaks. The way Lady Gaga uses it is community. They're building her little monsters to be something worldwide. And by the way, she's activated that community for causes. She's activated that community to do things that are more important than just being a fan and an artist relationship. It's about an experience. So So yes, as long as we remember that the social and social media means that we have to do or think about it differently, then it's always going to be special. And that's why Lady Gaga is a good example.
Great answer, Brian, and great finishing thought here. Let's give Brian a hand and say thanks for.
Thank you. Thank you, Christian. So thank you, everybody.
To let people know where they can connect with you, Brian. You have.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Well, here it's just a group chat. I'll put it here on Twitter, the blog, and then I'll. Christian, I'll send you. Oh, I also have a TV show. There you go. So those 3 links are the ones that are the most important. And Christian, I'll send you a link to the digital transformation report, and you can give that to the class for free. It's pretty interesting.
Brian, thanks so much. Huh?
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your attention. Good luck, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye. Thank you.